An 81-year-old elegant contestant won the Best Dressed award at this year's Miss Universe Korea pageant, and she's been making headlines here and elsewhere for her poise and passion to prove that age is just a number. We have details on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Friday, October 18th here in South Korea. I'm Min Sunhee. A growing number of senior Koreans are seeking to take roads not taken by their earlier counterparts as they choose to venture onto runways and into rapping. For more on this, I have Yang Chien-Hao, a Taiwanese journalist based here in Seoul. Chien-Hao, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, hello, I'm very glad to be here.
I also have Sebastien Falletti, a correspondent for French daily Figaro. Sebastien, welcome.
Thank you for your hospitality.
Right. Chien-Hao, we'll start with you. How do you explain the international interest garnered by Korea's most glamorous granny, as BBC described her?
Indeed, I'm not surprised. I'm very glad to see this being discussed. I think the reason that it attracts people's attention is because many well-developed countries are all facing the problems of aging society. So what kind of the role that the elder generation can play will definitely become an issue, especially that we talk about beauty, we talk about charisma, and it is very easy that you're going to be excluded when you're getting old. So, and also in Taiwan and in South Korea, or even in European countries, you can often see that, especially on the mainstream media, like tabloid newspapers. They often describe superstars or famous, well-looking actors or singers when they are getting old, they're having wrinkles, and some you can see some descriptions saying that their face are collapsing or that they are not beautiful anymore. That has caused more bias or stereotypes, indeed, when only judge on people's outlooks based on the changing of their age. So, and most of the people, they want to look pretty and they don't want to listen to this kind of criticism, and because we're all getting old year by year. So you can see the contradictions do exist. But since now South Korea has entered into aging society, and we are only going to have more and more older people. Also, those people after they enter into their 60s and 70s, they retire. They have more free time, so they want to have more kind of achievements. So I regard the Mrs. Choi Soon-hwa, the so-called glamorous granny's case, not only the breakthrough, but also a kind of demonstration, drawing people's attention to what kind of mind or attitude we should have toward aging and toward the old people. Idealistically, I would hope that people seeing aging as just like leather. When we buy a pair of former leather shoes or leather bags, it's just new. It's nothing special. But if you worn it or if you carry them, they will have scratches and they might have wrinkles, and it was always being seen as a symbol of beauty and charisma. So I do hope that human could also be seen like that.
Right, and perhaps expanding then on what Chien-Hao has said, Sebastien, do you suppose that the reality that Korea is one of the world's fastest aging societies has actually perhaps shed greater light on Choi Soon-hwa's participation in this beauty contest?
Absolutely. You know, we as journalists, this is an open secret. When we write, we need what we call a hook. And I mean, this story of the granny is a wonderful hook for journalists like us to write about a more substantial issue, which is the aging society, the fast aging society that Korea is becoming. And it is now very well known that Korea has the lowest birth rate in the world, and this has caught the attention around the world. I can see we all have been reporting on this, and this is grabbing the attention of the audience globally because, of course, the most advanced economy in the world are facing the same thing, and Korea is like a reflection also what's happening elsewhere. So that's grabbed the attention of this story. And yes, the question of how fast Korea is aging is fascinating people, because also Korea being a very tech advanced society, so a society that is at the same time very popular on the cultural front with the Hallyu. There's all these combination mixed of something both very new, very modern, but at the same time already facing some dramatic demographic challenges. So there is this cocktail that is quite vivid and that does catch the attention of the media around the world.
Right, and prior to the attention that has been granted to Choi Soon-hwa, Chien-Hao, I believe a while back you actually covered a group of senior Korean men who were generating much buzz online for their chic styles and choreography. Could you share us a bit details about your particular coverage and what were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, they're called the ajoshis. I've covered an interview with them like in 2021 with Thomas Maresca, who is also the very good friend of this program. So I interviewed with Thomas together with the ajoshis, and it was the time when the word of kunde, so-called condescending man, is being widely introduced and discussed internationally. And the ajoshis mostly are there in their 60s. They are already retired. And you can see they are dressing in the fashion way, and they practice how to have poses behind the camera, and they practice dancing and having like short videos. And their manager, Mr. Kwon Chon-hyun, told me that in the beginning he was just playing in a so-called new grade project, providing consulting service of dressing to older generation and make like photograph for them. So Mr. Kwon was trying to find models to promote this project, and later a friend of him introduced the ajoshis to him, and he made the ajoshis showing on the social media, and it becoming like a smash hit. So you can see that nowadays, like many like companies, they're trying to invite the ajoshis for like promoting merchandise, and like you can see that on the advertisements anywhere. And what makes me feel impressive is that Mr. Kwon told me that based on his experience, he did sense that some of the younger generation in South Korea, they tend to have a very critical views or even hatred feelings toward the older generation. But if you change their dress code into the more younger or fashion ways, the negative attitude of younger people to the old people decrease. And Mr. Kwon said that he told me that his role and his mission is to change the old people's way of dressing, and then open up a way for the younger people and the old people to have interactions and having dialogues together to eliminate the gap. And that ajoshis told me that indeed it's not only about dressing, it's also that the older generation, they themselves also need to change their mind, trying to let the younger generations know that we are really working hard to try to understand what the younger generations are thinking. So you can see that we can see that it's mutual. Both of the young and old generation have to learn something.
Do you suppose this sentiment between the old and young is largely based then on misunderstanding between the generations?
It's not. I don't think it's misunderstanding. It has some reasons based on the different growing backgrounds. And I'm going to explain
tell us
it more.
A bit about the
differences, because then. Like as my view, it's something to do not only with only age, but also combining with many factors such as like growing backgrounds and like Confucianism culture, and also military dictatorship for over 30 or 40 years in South Korea. Korea is already a society which classes, levels, or patriarchy have played very core roles in the society. And those who are in their 60s and 70s, many of them, they experienced a hard time and rebuild of the nation after the Korean War. So they endured a very hard time economically, which they have to earn their livings. And then when the economy was growing, it was the military dictatorship period in the politics, which patriarchy or obeying the higher level become rationalized. Even physical punishment were being seen. It was very common during that time. But if we look at the current young generation in their 20s or 30s, they are living in a more wealthy environment and with democratization and also Hanliu, which also make them more willing to show themselves, to reveal their personal opinions and making decisions together. So that's already a lot of differences, and that cause contradictions between the old generation and the young generation. So that you can see that old generation always like blaming the young generation, you guys are immature, you guys are inefficient, but the young generation also complain complaining that, oh, the old people, they are not knowing what the world is going on, and they are being too arbitrary without taking others into consideration. So this kind of problem still exists. I believe that every country around the world have the same problem, but I think that it's definitely more serious in South Korea.
Right, I see. And the dress code then among the senior Korean men that you interviewed called the ajashis was perhaps creating for them a better image within the young men.
So I do think that for older people, if they start to change themselves on their dress code, that might give them a chance to have more dialogues or conversations to those younger than them.
Right, of course. And this, of course, was based on your coverage. Yeah. All right, then. Sebastien, moving forward, dismal birth rates, as you mentioned earlier, and as Chien-Hao has touched upon, and Asian communities, they are universal concerns. That being said, what can you tell us about this particular reality in Europe, and how does that compare to the situation here in South Korea?
Well, I would say if you look at the statistics, we are getting into quite a similar territory where actually today Korea, since this year for the first time, you have like more people over 70s than in their 20s. You have almost 20% of the population now that is over 60-year-old, which the UN recognizes as like an aging society. And Korea is moving toward a super aging society. But if you look at this figure in the EU, we are roughly at the same overall. We're around 21%. So it's kind of similar. Of course, there are differences. If you go to Jeollado, already we are in a more aging situation. And if you are in downtown Seoul, but it's the same in Europe. But I think the big difference between Europe and here is maybe looking at the socio-economic status of the old elderly. Because basically the elderly in Europe have been witnessing the most extraordinary growth story in the history of the Europe. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, the Europe economy was booming, and they have seen their wealth accumulating a lot. And there's another aspect that is different, is that we also have a very solid welfare state that was established in most EU countries. So today, ironically, the big difference in Europe, the elder population are actually the wealthier, and they are wealthier than the young people. They are the ones who have the most often saving. Of course, there's the issue of retirement, and this is something we can talk about later, but it is challenging for a lot of older people too. But I think in Korea, the issue of economic challenges for the elderly and the issue of poverty among senior citizens is a major issue also. We know also there's a very high suicide rate of senior in Korea. And this is maybe quite a different feature in Europe. Ironically, it's more the young people are complaining that the older people have too good a position, they have too much economic power, and they are struggling to get a job, to live up to the expectation of their parents. So that's, I think, the main difference is the economic, social status that is different in Europe and compared to here.
All right, then. And speaking about here, then, Sebastien, what are your thoughts with regard to efforts here in the country to better address, of course, falling birth rates and, of course, an aging society?
Well, I mean, I've been like every journalist, we work on this. And when you talk to young people, in Korea, an expert, I mean, we know that the government, the President Yoon Suk-yeol have called a so-called national emergency. They have been announcing a lot of measures to support young families, couples, including a lot of economic support. And of course, these are welcome. But when you talk to people, why they're not having family, why they're not having kids, the main thing they say is about the mentality in the society, is about competitiveness in the society. They said this society is too competitive, so it's a very stressful, a burden to have a child, a family, because I feel I'm gonna have to raise that kid to get to the best. It's gonna be a competition to the best school, competition to the best place to live. So mentality of competitiveness, generation gap, like Chien-Hao mentioned about the tension between younger generation and older generation. I think the younger generation are also rejecting some of the package or the values maybe coming from Confucian society, and they don't want to follow on the same template, but the package is still there, so they are kind of reluctant to embark on this. And then you add one more fracture, I think is the gender fracture between male and female. If you listen to young people in Korea, male and female is increasingly some kind of competition, tension, or lack of dialogue. Even some people claim it's a gender war. Maybe it's an exaggerated term, but it encapsulates this tension. So all these together, I think, are the real core issue that explain why Korea is facing such a dramatic demographic crisis that is really, there's 2 times less birth rate than in Japan. So this is really something spectacular. And around the world, people are really surprised. And the question is whether this is going to become a central debate in society in Korea now and in the future election.
Right, especially as we currently face an aging society, of course. Meanwhile, beyond South Korea, Chien-Hao, back in July, lawmakers over in Taiwan, they abolished the clause requiring retirement at the age of 65, I believe. Yes. What prompted this particular move and what has been the response there?
Indeed, there are 2 bills being passed. One is the revision of Middle-Aged and Elderly Employment Promotion Act, which will push the government take more efforts to develop more job opportunities to the olders. And another one is the revision of the Labor Standards Act, which regulates that if the employees if they are reaching the retiring age, he or she can extend working after reaching the agreement of collective bargaining instead of being forced to retire. And without any reasonable causes, the company cannot have any discrimination toward the employees over 65 years old. Indeed, Taiwan has the population of 23 million, and the population over 65 years old is around 4.2 million, which charges around 18%. And if you compare the labor force participation rate of the population over 65 years old with other countries, the result is indeed disappointing. You can see that in South Korea it's 41%, which is like nearly the highest in the Asia countries. And then 32.9 in Singapore, 14.6 in Hong Kong. But in Taiwan, it's only 8.4. So Taiwan, so that makes the Taiwanese government trying to trying to find some ways to boost and trying to encourage more like elder generation taking more jobs. But what I need to point out is that for those over 65 years old, yes, if you successfully negotiate with the company, you can still work or extend your contract. But if both sides can't have an agreement, then the employees still need to retire. So that comes the problem. What if the company insists that the current retiring worker doesn't have enough ability and ask him or she to leave? So then we will need to wait for the arbitration or the judgment from the Ministry of Labor. We believe that this act, the bill, is paved with good intention, but it is predictable that it might have some problems after it is being put into practice. For example, like in South Korea, you have 민주노총 or 한국노총, the labor unions, but in Taiwan, many enterprises or companies, they even don't have labor unions. Then how can you expect strong power of negotiating with the company's owners or employers? And also, every company has different situation. If they are really not affordable or just reject continuing employing, will they face any accusation of discriminating? That is to say that more scheme, more like a system plan will need to be made to protect both sides.
Right. And very briefly speaking, Sebastien, in France, the legal retirement age was raised to 64 from 62, I believe. Could you very briefly tell us about that?
Yes, I mean, this is one of the most contentious issues in France of the last few years, and I would say decade. And it's one of the few, this so-called pension reform, one of the few reforms that President Macron managed to get through, but it was an uphill battle. And this reform is still is entering into force. but it's still a very contentious issue. And the new Prime Minister in France, Michel Barnier, has said he will keep that reform, but he's already talking about amending it or improving it, as he says. But this topic is at the heart of a lot of debate in France, because French public finance are in big trouble. They are under the surveillance of the EU, and we know when we listen to economists that the cost of the pension system is one of the core issue if you want to rebalance the finance in France. And of course, they are saying that 64 is not enough, and if you could raise that retirement age like many other EU countries, that will be a major factor in order to rebalance the public finance in France. Right. So this debate is not going to go away. We're going to have other election in France 27, and certainly already some political parties are saying they want to reopen that reform. Some others say we need to go further down. So this is a core issue.
It's an ongoing debate, a very solemn debate that needs that has yet to see a resolution. Then, again, very briefly, but coming back to South Korea, Chien-Hao, a group of rapping grandmothers in their 80s made quite a bit of headlines earlier this year. Now, sadly, one of them passed away at the age of 87 this month, owing to cancer. But her daughter claimed that her mother lived her last few months in heaven, given a chance to be on stage to rap. That raised fresh debate about the quality of life of seniors here in the country. Very briefly, what are your thoughts on the quality of life of seniors here in the country?
I think it's very difficult, and it's also something to do with social welfare system, just like Sebastien just mentioned. Now there are around like 74% of the people join the National Pension Service, the NPS, but there is always like severe concerns that the system might go bankrupt in around like 15 to 20 years. Also, the joining rate of the low income groups is only around 40, which means the social welfare system itself might not be able to protect those who are really in need. And I think it will definitely cause problems when those group of people getting old. The current NPS system is still unstable, and aging speed of South Korea is going far fast. And also recently, not only in Japan, we can see more and more cases of lonely deaths or suicide problem on the news in South Korea. I've covered that. I've seen that many old people, they have nowhere to go. They only choose to live in Koshiwon or the Chokbangchon, the small house area, and based on their basic wage or small amount of pension. And also South Korea has experienced the IMF crisis, right? So many people in their, like during that time, 30s or 40s or 50s, they went bankrupt. And this group of people, they are now getting from 50s to 70s, but they are still suffer and they need more help. So they are still struggling, earning their lives. So these need to be taken into consideration.
Right, and hopefully stories like Choi Soon-hwa's participation in the beauty pageant will shed fresh light on the need to deal with the issues faced by the senior citizens here in the country. Then, Chien-Hao, thank you so much for your time here, and Sebastien, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of this week's editions of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching.